Welcome to LifeLight Session 6. We're glad to have you with us. Not too many to go. 6 out of 9. We're making our way through. So let's begin with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, you created the universe and you continue to preserve it. You've given us all good things and have withheld no good thing from us. You rescued us from sin and death by the sacrifice of your only Son, Jesus Christ. Remind us always that were it not for you, we would remain lost and condemned creatures. Give us grateful hearts so that we may serve you by serving others. In Jesus' name, Amen. Amen. She just wanted to make sure we knew that she had arrived.
That's funny.
All right, so if you want to open your Bibles to Judges 10, we're going to begin with verse 1. I kind of feel bad for these judges that we sort of just skip over, right? All that's really mentioned is that they did their thing. This is how long they led, and that was it, right? Nothing really all that exciting happens.
No tent spikes through their temple.
No tent spikes, no falling columns, no smashing torches. Nothing really all that exciting. But it is worth chronicling those people. It is interesting to note, the more faithful a judge is, the more faithful they are to God, and the more faithful that they are to their calling, the longer they seem to serve. The longer that they seem to serve. Now, I don't know that always is the case, or that's a measurement by which you can determine how righteous a person is. But it is something to note that some of these judges that have big flaws will only reign for a small period of time. So let's begin Judges 10, 1 through 16. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo. I'm the son of Dodo. A man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim, and he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. After him arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities, called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Canaan. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines, and they forsook Yahweh and did not serve him. So the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Philistines, and into the hand of the Ammonites. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the people of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. And the Ammonites crossed the Jordan to fight also against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. The people of Israel cried out to Yahweh, saying, "We have sinned against you, because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals." And Yahweh said to the people of Israel, "Did I not save you from the Egyptians, from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, from the Philistines? The Sidonians also, and the Amalekites, and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you from their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods, therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in your time of distress." The people of Israel said to Yahweh, "We have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us in this day." So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served Yahweh. And he became impatient over the misery of Israel. Okay, so after Abimelech came Tola. Right, Tola of Issachar. Tola served for how many years as judge?
23.
23. Then came Jair of Gilead, who served for how many years?
22.
22. So then after the death of Jair, what happened?
They did evil again in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam and other gods.
Yeah. So with Tola and Jair, a lot of the peace that they see there likely comes out of this level of disrespect to God, this level of rebellion not being fully developed, or at least not being the case, right? It's when these huge times of distress come that God allows Israel to be overthrown. When they throw away God and move on to other things, when they need to be set back on the right track, is when he brings about that correction for them. So that Israel, once again, is ensnared by the Canaanites, lived in the promised land, and by their pagan gods, Baal and Ashtoreth. What are the pagan gods that they began to worship?
Gods of Syria, gods of Moab, gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines.
Yeah. And I mean, the lineup, you probably have heard of at least some of these gods, right? Of Sidon and Canaan had the same gods. And kind of their big gods were Baal and Asherah, which are names that you've heard a lot, because it seems to be the gods that Israel trips over the most. But they also served Dagon. I'm sure you've probably heard that name before. That god is still worshipped today, believe it or not. Dagon and Moloch. In Syria, they worship Hadad and Amath, Rimmon. In Moab, they serve Chemosh. The Ammonites served Molech. Molech is a common one that you might have heard of before. And Milcom. And then the Philistines also served Dagon and Baal-zebub, which God uses as an example, Beelzebub, which in a lot of lore becomes a name for Satan. And in cultural's weird fascination with hell and a hierarchy of Satan's angels has become one of his lieutenants or whatever, which is utter nonsense, right? It's this pagan god that comes from. And God plays off of that other places in Scripture. So that's to kind of give a bit of a name to the face, so to speak. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. And the influence of these different gods intermingles quite a bit as these nations interact with one another. How does the Lord respond to his people's flagrant idolatry?
Sold them to the hands of the Philistines and the children of Ammon.
Yeah, so he gives them into the hands of the Philistines, or the Philistines, and the Ammonites. How long were they oppressed?
18 years.
18 years, yeah. And then the people cry out, confessing their sin of idolatry. So at least they've got that part of the pattern right. They know how they're supposed to respond after they've screwed up.
They know how to fix this.
Yeah. How does God respond? I'm sure it must have been startling for him.
done with you.
Yeah.
Go talk to those other gods.
Yeah, if you're so devoted to these other gods after everything that I've done for you.
You remind him too that he delivered them from Egypt.
He did. He reminded them that he delivered them out of Egypt, of his saving work over and over and over again in Judges as well, in Joshua, those battles in Joshua, even the battles in Exodus. And here we are. You continue to fail. To hold God in as the center of your life. And go cry to your new gods then. Because I'm done. I'm done. But what do the people do?
They put away their gods.
They put away their gods and they persist. They do what is right. Right? This is the proper response. It shouldn't have been necessary because they shouldn't have walked away in the first place. But this was the proper response. To be persistent, to continue to ask for that mercy, because we know that our God is a God of mercy. And if you don't think that God's a God of mercy, look at this moment. This is a great moment to point to. Look at how they've spit in his face, how they've continued to cast him aside and turn to other gods. And yet here he still is willing to give them a second chance, to give them another chance to be his people. It is easy to condemn the Israelites because of their continued pattern of sin and repentance. In Romans 7, Paul talks about our connection to that same problem. Are we any different? No, we're not. Right? It might be to a lesser degree on an individual level, but look at us on a full scale level.
Exactly. If we look at the whole picture of the United States, there's always this continual pulling away from God, from Yahweh.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and when we try to imagine what's going on here in the biblical message, often what we think about it for what we see in our world today is a world in which the society as a whole has turned away from God's will and is completely going in a different direction, worshiping their own gods, going their own way, living contrary to God's will, and the churches are beginning to empty. Right? So because these nations are turning away from God, it doesn't mean that there isn't a faithful remnant. It doesn't mean that there aren't churches. It doesn't mean that there aren't good people in Israel. But what it does mean is that there is a concentrated problem here within this nation. And that's what the author chooses to focus on, is the interaction between God and that focused group that are causing a problem here. So when we think about it in terms of our world today, there are many ways in which our culture is chasing after other gods, right? The ways in which they live contrary to God's will and have chosen different ethical models. It's all over. Moral relativism, postmodernism, all sorts of different things that are competing models, replacing God, taking him out of that whole system. And so we aren't any different. It's the same patterns. It's the same patterns. On an individual level, that battle happens within us, right? Luther talks about how we are in need of forgiveness every day of our lives. And Paul points out here in this passage, the things that I want to do, those are the things I don't do. But the things that I'm not supposed to do, the things that I don't want to do, those are the things that I keep doing. Right? Lord, have mercy on us all. But that's the way it is for us. In Christ, God never stops loving his people. How does that comfort you when you fall into sin every day?
You still got another chance.
Yeah, right.
There's hope for forgiveness.
Yeah, always. You see how loving and forgiving God is. You see how your battle with sin, even though you still commit sins and you are in need of forgiveness, it's not to this degree. It's not all-out rebellion. It's not a complete let go of God for 18 years. Right? You haven't abandoned God. So it's not even to this degree. The battle within yourself. That level of sin isn't there. I know on Sunday, was it last Sunday that I talked about idols? I don't know. The sermons begin to mix together after a while. I'm sure they do for you too. But idols are always the easiest way to talk about this. And that was how I was taught to do Christian counseling. Right? When somebody comes in, a lot of what we're called to do, and this might be a really good spiritual discipline for you, is to identify the idol within your heart. Usually when there's something that is very troubling for you, or something that's causing a conflict in a relationship, often the problem is that there is an idol in your heart. There's something that you're fearing, loving, or trusting above God that is causing conflict both with your relationship with God and your relationship with one another. And that's causing a huge negative impact on your life. And so a lot of what Christian counseling is just talking about it so that we can identify together what that idol is that is breaking down those two relationships. And often it's I mean, the easiest example is always to bring up marriages, right? Is to talk about marriages. The biggest problems with marriages is communication, time, money, right, sex, those kinds of things. And those always, when you get down to it, they become problems of a particular idol, right? A particular idol, something that you fear, love, or trust above someone else, or above God, and is impeding that relationship with your spouse. I'm trying to think of a really good example of this. I had a bunch, and then I read the end of the study and got all worked up because I didn't like the way that the study went. Well, anyway. But you kind of get what I'm saying, right?
Okay, do those idols exist even though you fight against them?
Mm-hmm.
As much as I should say they do exist,
Mm-hmm.
even as much as you pray, even as much as you look to the Lord for help,
Mm-hmm.
even as much as we go to communion
Yeah.
for the remission of those sins.
Right.
They're still there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, you have to, so when we talk about it in terms of counseling, right, they're usually very physical, or not necessarily visible, but they're very real things that you're dealing with, that you're struggling with. A great example, a married couple might come in. The wife does not trust the husband with money, right? So the husband has a hard time managing money. They have a certain love for
Cheeseburgers.
Right? And that love has turned into a problem. The wife has talked to the husband about how, honey, you shouldn't be eating that many cheeseburgers. The husband's like, yeah, but I really love them. They continue to eat the cheeseburgers, the wife nags them, and the husband finally begins to do it in secret and hides it from them and tries to keep it off the books. and it continues to break down. And then finally they come into my office frustrated that they can't seem to work this out. At which point then, through a lot of conversation and a lot of careful work, we point out that the wife fears poverty, does not trust the husband, right? And the husband cares far more about the material things, that hamburger, than they do about this is kind of a silly example, but you get it, right? I mean, you can see the way those are real ways in which those idols do manifest. So we're not talking about blocks of wood on the mantle here, right? We're talking about things, attachments, unhealthy habits that become something that you fear, love, or trust in so much that it begins to negatively impact the rest of your life, right? That was a pretty silly example.
Cheeseburgers could be anything. Could be eating out in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
You're spending a lot of your budget eating out or door dashing cheeseburgers. You know.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so then you've got to rebuild those areas that are broken down.
Then the question might be, what exists in this area between a couple who's been faithful to each other and 50 years, 60 years maybe even, they've been faithful to each other. How have they dealt with this problem?
Sure.
They've been open with each other, I guess,
Yeah.
as the first thing.
Right.
They've acknowledged that there's some kind of something out there that interests you or interests the wife,
Yeah.
and still they deal with it.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely getting down to it, right? You're getting down to it. Does love of cheeseburgers really have to become such a problem in the? No, you just need to teach how to moderate, rate, and how to, do it honestly with one another, and different things like that. You break it down, right? And you follow examples of those who have been there, those who have done that, different things like that. But you have to identify what those idols are and address them.
And then let's face it, at the center of that relationship is Jesus.
Has to be. Has to be.
Has to
Right.
be.
Yeah, has to be. Okay, does that make sense? I'm not sure that I'm necessarily bringing that to light. Oh, I should just bring up the example of when I got trained. We had to do case studies, right? So one of us was an actor who took on this persona of a real life case, and the other one was the counselor. Well, I counseled a young teenager who was pregnant out of wedlock, had not told her parents, was worried about whether or not she was going to be able to go to college, and was contemplating an abortion because of it. So that was the case that was thrown in front of me. And so we identified some of those idols that were on her heart, right? So some of the biggest idols were, if I don't go to college, I'm not going to be successful, right? So there was a unhealthy trust in the need for a degree, right? There was my identity is built into this. So again, that unhealthy trust in that degree, and there was this incredible amount of fear of what her parents would say about the child when they found out, and what and how drastically her life would be changed because of that child. And so that was an idol that we needed to address, was the idol of fear of the consequences of that whole situation, right? And so like, she cannot move on with her life in a healthy way until she is able to deal with those idols, right? And that's not necessarily to say that you have to end up on this side of that decision, or you have to end up on this side of the decision for that idol to be. No, you need to wrestle with it. You need to come to terms with your relationship with God. And then once you're free and clear, then you need to make a decision that is in line with that, right? But don't let that fear rule your life, or don't let this like unreasonable standard that you're holding yourself to ruin your life. Be able to recognize that who you are in God, and then reason through that situation. That's a better example.
Then would you say that maybe those psychological problems are more prevalent than worshiping a piece of wood or something?
Oh, absolutely. But that's what I'm pointing out
Yeah.
here, right? That's what I'm trying to point out, is that these idols, more often than not, they're not a piece of wood. They're not a God that we chase after. They're real situations that are put into our life. And what makes them an idol is when we mishandle them, and we do it a lot. And we do it a lot. Like your whole day, you deal with idols in your life. Your whole day, you manage this, and you don't even know. And you don't even know, right? We only talk about the ones you get hung up on, right? We only talk about the big ones that make such a drastic impact on your life. But when you recognize that that's what we're talking about here, are the things, the things in your life that stick you in the mud, that's what it is. We're trying to equip ourselves as Christians to be able to piece through and handle those situations in the best way that we can.
We're kind of almost talking about how you can move on. Because those fears of that teenage girl are real.
Oh yeah,
They are real.
Yeah.
Everybody that has teenagers prays all the time that they don't get in that situation. You know, that
Right.
Because it's
right.
tough.
Yeah,
I
well-
can't imagine what it would be like to be that person's head. Pretty real.
Yeah. Don't hear me saying that those fears aren't real, or that what she's feeling isn't real. Those are serious challenges that she's got to face, right? But what I'm saying is that God is bigger than her problem, right? And so in that way, don't let this paralyze you. Don't let this cause you to make poor decisions or ruin your life further. But recognize that God's in control. God's going to take care of you, and you're going to be okay. And let's talk about this.
That sounds better.
Yeah. Right? So much of it is just a matter of, let's put things in perspective. Let's take a second and identify the actual problem here. Let's identify the actual problem here. And then we'll be able to make concrete steps forward. Right? That's what it is.
Is this why God gave the first commandment? No other gods before me?
You'd think, yeah.
Of course. Of course. All right, let's keep going. Starting at 17. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, "Who is the man who begin the fight against the Ammonites. He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob with worthless fellows, collected around Jephthah and went out with him. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel, and the Ammonites made war. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come and be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gives them over to me, I will be your head." The elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "Yahweh will be witness between us if we do not do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all his words before Yahweh at Mizpah. So the Israelites wondered who might stand up against the Ammonites and deliver them. The writer introduces Jephthah, a mighty man of valor. What skeleton did Jephthah have in his closet?
Wasn't he the son of harlot, mighty warrior, but a son of a whore?
Yes, a son of a prostitute.
A prostitute.
Likely, so a lot of these Canaanite gods and a lot of the other foreign gods had sexual fertility rituals where the temple would have prostitutes that the guys of the village would have the responsibility of going up and sleeping with them. Because every time, so I'm just going to speak from the Canaanite gods because that's what I know. Baal and Asherah are boyfriend and girlfriend. And basically, you will have a good crop if they sleep together. That was kind of the concept. Well, the idea is that amorous lovemaking up at the temple will cause them to sleep together. And so they had holy prostitutes. It seems like an oxymoron.
Oh, boy.
They had holy prostitutes up at the temple, and it was the responsibility of the gentlemen within that religion to take their turn and go up and sleep with the prostitute. And it was important that they slept with the prostitutes so that Baal and Asherah would get turned on and they would do the nasty as well. Right? And the whole point was that then you would have a fertile crop that year. Okay? Likely, that's what we're talking about here. Is that Gilead, the leader of this family group, would have gone up to sleep with a prostitute and likely got her pregnant. Which was something we're celebrating for them because that means that you really did a good job.
And since men own the children, he went to live with his father's family.
Exactly. Plus, a prostitute can't take care of her kids and do her prostitutely duties. So
the wife gets one more mouth to feed and one more kid to take care of, yeah.
Exactly, and you can
Lovely
understand
system.
why it really, yeah. You can understand though why the kids would be so upset, right? Why do they chase him off?
They don't want to share the inheritance.
They don't want to share the inheritance. You're not even one of us, right? You're not one of us. You're one of the, yeah. So they chase him off. But God has other plans. God has other plans because every life is precious in His sight. With whom does Jephthah then join forces?
Enter the worthless fellows again.
Yeah, worthless fellows again. Right? That same term, just unreliable individuals. And this is the company that this poor guy has to live with. And I just want to point out, this doesn't happen until Jephthah's brothers are older. Until they grow up. And it's not very clear how many of his siblings would have been older than he is and how many would have been younger. But more than likely, Jephthah's married by the time he's removed, by the time that he's chased off. So he's going to Tob, likely with a wife and daughter.
And I wonder if maybe his father had died or was close to dying or something that made him think, okay, we need to get rid of this guy, we need to chase him off.
Likely, yeah, likely. But when they chase him off, I mean, when he comes back, he has a daughter. So likely he was married, or he married when he was over in Tob. The timeline isn't terribly clear. But nonetheless, he's not a child.
Right, he's
When
done
he's
12.
chased away,
Yeah.
right? So then when the Ammonites attack Gilead, what do the elders do? We're sorry we chased you away.
They want to come back and be their leader.
Please come back. Please come back. It's funny how when you look at these situations from a bird's eye view, how childish we look. How childish. How does Jephthah respond?
He said, he kicked me out of my father's house and hated me. Why he come back to me?
Yeah, you drove me away. What do you want now? I did what I was told. I was a good boy. Right? So then, what does Jephthah ask of the elders?
Just want to make sure we have a clear deal here.
Yeah. So if I come back, you're actually going to listen to me, right? Like, you're going to make me leader. Yeah, I get that. But you're actually going to listen to me, right? This isn't one of those things where, like, you're drawing me back so you can kill me so that I don't take the inheritance or something like that. Or I'm not going to come back and be a puppet.
Said the Lord was supposed to be a witness in front of him.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's how the elders respond, right? So the elders say, this is what we want. Please come back. We accept your request. And then how do the people respond after the elders? They make an oath, right?
Right.
They make an oath to God
God
that
be our
will
witness.
uphold that promise. God be our witness. It will be as you have said. Let's keep reading. Then Jephthah sent to the messengers of the king of the Ammonites and said, what do you have against me that you have come to fight me, to fight against my land? And the king of the Ammonites answered the messengers of Jephthah, because Israel was coming up from Egypt, because Israel on coming up from Egypt took away my land from Arnon to Jabbok and to the Jordan, and now therefore restore it peaceably. Jephthah again sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites and said to him, thus says Jephthah, Israel did not take away the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites. But when they came from Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and came to Kadesh. Israel then sent messengers to the king of Edom, saying, please let us pass through your land. But the king of Edom would not listen. They sent also to the king of Moab, but he would not consent. So Israel remained at Kadesh. Then they journeyed through the wilderness and went around the land of Edom and the land of Moab, and arrived on the east side of the land of Moab, and camped on the other side of Arnon. But they did not enter the territory of Moab, for Arnon was the boundary of Moab. Israel then sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, king of Heshbon, and Israel said to him, "Please let us pass through the land to our country." But Sihon did not trust Israel to pass through the territory, so Sihon gathered all his people together and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. And Yahweh, God of Israel, gave Sihon and all his people into the hand of Israel, and they defeated them. So Israel took possession of all the land of the Amorites who inhabited that country. They took possession of all the territory of the Amorites, from Arnon to Jabbok, and from the wilderness to the Jordan. Then Yahweh, God of Israel, dispossessed the Amorites from before his people Israel. And are you to take possession of them? Will you not possess what Chemosh, your God, gives to you to possess? And all that Yahweh, our God, has dispossessed before us, we will possess. Now, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever contend against Israel, or did he ever go to war with them? While Israel lived in Heshbon and its villages, and in Aroer and its villages, and in the cities that are on the banks of Arnon, 300 years, why did you not deliver them within that time? I therefore have not sinned against you. You do me wrong by making war on me. Yahweh the judge, decide this day between the people of Israel and the people of Ammon. So Jephthah sends messengers to the king of Ammon. What did he ask the king?
Go ahead.
Let them pass through.
What do you have against us?
Right.
Yeah, what do you have against us, right? Why are you attacking us? What is your deal? What's your problem? How does the king respond to Jephthah's inquiry?
It's a fictional history.
Yeah, it's a fictional history. You took our land, give it back. And I mean, they have a close heritage with the Amorites, but they weren't the Amorites. And even though they've taken over some of the Amorite land at that point and have, it doesn't mean that they have claim to it, right? But basically, you took our land, so give it back. How then does Jephthah respond to the demands of the king?
Let me remind you of what the history really was.
Yeah, let's talk about that history then. Because it was God. It was God who gave us that land. So who are you to take it? Jephthah's defense has three more main points. His first was that Israel did not take the land from the Ammonites. From whom did Israel take the land?
Amorites. And
The Amorites, right? Sihon the Amorite, the king. What was Jephthah's second point in his defense?
It was God who took the land away.
Right. Gods define these boundaries. Your God defines your boundary. Whatever land your God has given to you, that defines your boundary.
He allowed them to win the war.
This land was given to us by our God. Who are you to claim it from us? Claim that we took it wrongfully. It was our God who gave it to us. Right? Let your God Chemosh tell you where you can go and where you can set your boundaries. And we'll let our God, the one true God, tell us where we can set our tents. Well, rhetorical question, did Jephthah add to his defense to make this point clear? Will you not take what your God gives you?
Mm-hmm.
Will you not take what Chemosh gives you? How are we wrong in doing the same thing? What was Jephthah's third and final point in his defense?
That they've lived together peacefully for the last 300 years.
Yeah, we've owned this land for 300 years. Why are you bringing this up now? You haven't had a problem with us for 300 years, or with this land for 300 years. You're just looking for a fight. All right. So then Jephthah concludes his three-part defense with a challenge. Who does Jephthah say will settle this dispute?
God will.
Let the gods decide. Right? The one true God versus Chemosh. Let's see who's standing at the end of this. All right, now we get to the interesting stuff. Then the Spirit of Yahweh was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to Yahweh, and said, If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be Yahweh's, and I will offer it up as for a burnt offering. So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and Yahweh gave them into his hand. He struck them from Aroer to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel Keramim, with a great blow. So the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble for me. For I have opened my mouth to Yahweh, and I cannot take back my vow. She said to him, My father, you have opened your mouth to Yahweh. Do to me according to what has gone out from your mouth. And now that Yahweh has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. So she said to her father, Let this thing be done to me. Leave me alone for 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity and my companions. I and my companions. So he said, Go. Then he sent her away for 2 months, and she just departed, and she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year. All right. So, how does the king of Ammon respond to Jephthah's convincing argument?
He just stopped listening to him.
Completely ignores him, never responds. And he had his reason to fight, and that's all he wanted, right? Was his reason, and he's not gonna talk about it. He's not gonna back down from it. He has his reason to fight, so he's gonna go fight. Just as the Spirit of the Lord empowered Othniel to defeat the king of Aram and Gideon to defeat the Midianites, so the Spirit now empowers Jephthah, who attacks the Ammonites. What vow did Jephthah make?
If he wins the war, returns home, the first person to greet him will be offered up to burnt offering to God.
Yes.
What was he thinking?
Right. Oh gosh.
He wasn't.
This is one of the hardest passages in Scripture, because people just struggle with this. So I want to spend some time talking about what's going on here, because there's an unhealthy attitude here in Jephthah. And you can kind of see it, right? Remember how we, on Sunday, we talked a little bit about testing the will of the Lord, right? We talked about that in Bible study. We talked about there's a difference between putting the Lord your God to the test and saying, Lord, if this is what you want me to do with my life, cause it to succeed. If it isn't, close the doors that I know that you want me to go a different way, right? There are really positive ways of doing this. And it's really easy to over-spiritualize this and go too far with it, right? And we talked about some of those dangers of interpreting current events as acts of God, as acts of judgment of God upon certain people, right? Jephthah kind of does this. Notice the weight that he puts everything on God. God will define our borders. God will define who wins. God will decide this. God will decide that. Everything in his life is ruled by God, which is good. But perhaps a bit abused. Right? You can see that attitude, and here he takes it one step too far. God doesn't need a vow. God doesn't need a sacrifice. God already plans on giving him the victory. God already said he planned on giving him the victory. He doesn't need any more coercion. He doesn't need any more encouragement. He doesn't need a sacrifice. He doesn't need a vow. What are you doing, Jephthah? This is ridiculous. He doesn't need this. And yet here he is, making this vow that whatever comes out from the doors of the house to meet me when I return in peace from the Amorites shall be the Lord, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. I read through that passage in Hebrew. I read 5 different commentaries on it. All 5 of the scholars took it 5 different directions.
Oh.
Okay? And I just want to talk about some of the ways that... I'm going to talk to you about the main 2 rules of thought. Okay? The way that the study takes it is not the way that I agree with. Okay? But it interprets this motion, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes from the door of my house, specifically my house, not from my fields, not from my property, but from my house.
Yeah, what did he think was going to come out of his house?
I thought that was bizarre.
A cow? No.
We couldn't figure it out.
Well, and again, here's that attitude of, well, God's going to control what's going to come out of my house then. Whatever's going to come out of my house it is going to be important for him. Right? And so the way that the study takes this and the way that Luther takes this, Luther interprets it this way, and his translation of the Bible interprets it this way. The way that they take this is to mean from the house as a burnt offering, right? And so then let's follow that line of thought through this, and let's chat about it. So the god of Ammon was Molech, to whom the Ammonites would offer their sons and daughters as human sacrifice. I think I shared with this because Molech was one of the gods. Molech and Baal Hadad were a couple of the gods that influenced Israel to do human sacrifice. And that was one of the big problems that brought Elijah on the scene at Mount Carmel, was that he was battling that problem. And Baal Hadad, I'm not sure how they worship Molech, but Baal Hadad was the one that they dealt with on Mount Carmel. What they would do is Baal Hadad was a cow, and so they would make like a copper cow out of it, and then they would heat it up, and there would be contraption in the side, and the mothers would come up and throw their babies inside as a sacrifice to this god. It's awful practice. But God condemns specifically Molech very, very concretely here in Leviticus about such practices. What does the Lord say about these practices?
That the person sacrificing their children should be stoned.
Yeah, and this was actually one of those specific points where it says stoned to death, right? A lot of the punishments within Scripture are stoned, but not specifically necessarily stoned to death, right? Stoning didn't always end in death, and often didn't end in death. It was just a really, really nasty ordeal. But this one was specifically ending in death because human sacrifice is not tolerated by God. This is completely contrary to God's will. So then what would happen if Israel demonstrated tolerance and let the people who worship Molech with human sacrifice do their thing?
God would turn his face from them.
Yeah, God would turn his face from them, which is what we've been seeing, right? It's just a different way of saying sold them into the hand of this nation, right? Turn away your faiths, you abandon them, right? And cut them off from his people.
Yeah, cut them off from their people.
Yeah. Well, the translation I had both, which I think makes that even more profound. That it really was both. Jephthah had been caught in a trap laid by Satan long before. What had God commanded his people to do when they entered the promised land?
Get rid of all the gods.
Right, drive out the pagans and their gods, drive out these influences, drive out this corrupt way of thinking, and
don't intermarry with them, and don't take up their stuff.
Right, right, and so this is the consequence then of their behavior, right? This is the consequence of their failure. We find the idea of human sacrifice repulsive. The idea or concept of paying God or paying off God is actually still quite common, though. Many people believe that God looks on them favorably because of the good that they do. In fact, I just did a pastor's ponderings today on Joel Osteen and the prosperity gospel, which is filled with this. The concept that if you do good, you will prosper. Right? If you do bad, you won't prosper. And this concept that if you have good health and you're doing well in life, well, that's because you're doing good things and you're faithful to God and you're close to Him. And if your health is failing or you're dealing, it's because you've moved too far away from God and you're not doing the right things and you're not giving enough money to the church so that He can get His third jet. I mean, that's not how it works. That's not how any of this works. Have you even read a Bible, Joel Osteen? What does God say about good works when we offer them wrongly to atone for sins?
Polluted garment.
Polluted garment. Yeah, that's how our English Bibles say it. Polluted garment, soiled rag. You know what it actually is? You know what the Hebrew actually is? It's talking about the cloth that women use during their periods to collect the blood. That's what it's talking about. Right? It's saying that our good works are as useful as a used tampon or a soiled pad. That's all the good it is used for. Right? This is very, very inflammatory language to point out our inability to be able to save ourselves. What does God require as a punishment then for sin?
Death.
Right. There's no way out of this. Eternal damnation is the only way. But how does God resolve that problem? Jesus, the substitutionary atonement, right? The one who comes in and does what needs to be done. So I want to talk about this because I don't agree. I don't think that this is what Jephthah was thinking. I don't think that he was influenced by the Canaanite religions. I don't think so. Right? He wasn't a rash guy. It doesn't fit his personality. And yet that's the way that the study takes it. That's the way that Luther takes it. Is that what happens then is she's allowed to mourn in the mountains for 2 months with her friends, and then when she comes down, he sacrifices her. That's the notion. That's the notion. And Luther points out, well, that's clearly in the text. I don't agree. And Josephus and Augustine don't agree either. And I far better agree with their point. So going back then to the beginning of Jephthah's vow, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes through the doors of my house. So some scholars argue that that's not a reference to specifically his house, but to his property. That's ridiculous. It's very clearly the Hebrew word for his home. He's talking about the threshold of his home. So again, I don't know what he's thinking here. I don't think that he's thinking all that clearly. When it comes out from the door to meet me when I return, shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So the way that Luther interprets that is that shall be the Lord's, so that and is where people get tripped up. That and is where people get tripped up in that conjunction. So the conjunction can play several different roles in Hebrew literature. And of course, it's marked by the same word. Like, please, just add some diversity to your language. It would save so many arguments in the church. Oh my goodness. But one of the ways that it can function is kind of in a telescopic way. So I will give whatever meets me when I come back shall be the Lord's, and then I will offer it up as a burnt offering, right? So it's like here's what I'm going to do, but more specifically, this is really what I'm going to do, right? That's the conjunction way that can play out. The way that I kind of read this, the way that Josephus interpreted it, and the way that Augustine interpreted it, is I will give them up to the Lord, or I will give them up as a burnt offering. Kind of an indication of, if we're talking a human being, I'll give them to the Lord as a servant, as someone who will serve God all his life, much like it's the same language that Hannah had with Samuel, right? Or a burnt offering if it's an animal, right? And again, I don't know what Jephthah's thinking here, because he must think that this is something that has to be done, or he's influenced, or he's just not thinking. Maybe he had a bit too much to drink. I don't know. But he makes this vow to God, which is absolutely ridiculous. But when we get to the end, and this is the part that really gets me, okay? Why does she want to go up into the mountains? Why does it say?
To mourn her virginity.
Yeah, why are you going up in the mountains to mourn your virginity if you're going to die?
She never had a chance to get married.
Okay.
Lamenting that.
That's true if you become the Lord's.
True. Yeah.
If you serve as a prophetess or somewhere in his or in the Lord's court, you will remain a virgin for your whole life. It won't end in death.
Like being a nun.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's very specifically about her virginity. And let's be honest, what she's really mourning, it's not about sexual desire. It's about motherhood. That's what it is for her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what it is. But that's what it's about. Okay? So I don't know who or what he was expecting to come out of his house. But when his daughter comes out, he's mournful about that because he's giving her up to the Lord. But I don't think that he's going to sacrifice her. And I don't think that that's what we're talking about here. Otherwise, that language of her mourning would have been very different. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know that scholars will ever firmly agree one way or another. And I'm sure that we'll be arguing about this for a long time and focus way too much energy on it because it's really not that significant, right? But I just wanted to point that out. God, and even, let's say that you do go with Luther's interpretation here, right? Let's say that you do go with this interpretation that he did sacrifice his daughter. Does God in any way condone or thank Jephthah for that? Not once. Not once. God never makes any statement about this vow. It is completely on Jephthah. It's completely on his terms. It's completely his doing. And there's no comment about the outcome on behalf of God. God doesn't care. Right? So it's and that's another thing that makes me think this isn't actually sacrifice, is don't you think then the community would have killed Jephthah?
Instead, they celebrate, they have a festival essentially.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Remembering her.
right.
Remembering her. And you can do that if it's a servant of, yeah. So there's just a lot of different things going on there. But God in no way ever permits human sacrifice. Ever. Right? The three appearances of human sacrifice on behalf of God: Jesus, Isaac, and here.
And he stopped Isaac.
He stopped Isaac. Jesus was ordained by him for that task. And God's not even an active participant in this. Nor do I believe that it really is human sacrifice.
Don't agree with you.
And that's fine.
No, and my reason is because why would he react like this is so bad? Like, you came out and now I have to follow through with this thing that I said that I would follow through with. And verse 39, and he did to her as he had vowed. Like,
Yeah. Well, likely she would have had to go live with the Levites, where the Ark of the Covenant is, and serve in that place. And so there would be severe separation from his one and only child.
And he never gets to have grandchildren, that's the end of his line.
Yeah. But I don't disagree with your line of thinking. I mean, I get that. And that's the challenge, is that this can be interpreted both ways.
Either way, it was an unfortunate vow. probably.
Right. Well, and let's talk about that. What is the lesson here? Right? You can bicker all day about the outcome, whether the child was or was not sacrificed or what have you, but what was the real point here? What was the problem?
And he called it.
Yeah. Right. That Jephthah was the one calling the shots.
There's something in the Bible about not making a vow before God, let your yes be yes and your no be no, and move on.
Right. And that was one of the things the commentators, each of the commentators pointed out, is that every single person who ever makes a vow to God of like, you will do this for me, and I am grateful for that, and so I promise I will sacrifice a lamb, I will sacrifice my best cow, I will it's always specific. This is like the one instance where it's not, where he just kind of leaves it up to chance, and in that way I think he feels like he's being extra faithful because he's leaving it up to God of what he will be forced to give up or what he will be forced to sacrifice. Right?
at the end of the day, he was only a 6-year judge, so maybe he wasn't that good of a judge.
Right, and that's a lot of what I point out too, is that he's clearly got a few of his priorities mixed up. I mean, he's over spiritualizing these things. And that's going to cause some flaws in his judgment. And so I guess that, I think, is the biggest takeaway here, is that for a lot of Christians, the easiest thing in the world is to over spiritualize things. Right? I've met people who have been like, oh, I cut my thumb yesterday. That's because God was mad at me because I thought about stealing a pen when I was at the store. What? No, not everything is a moral lesson. Not everything is this super hyper spiritual thing, right? Not everything matters. We're on a bowling team, right? My teammate calls us the Holy Rollers because Jason's on it as a DC and me and my dad are on it as pastors. And so she thought it was funny. We have all these church workers, let's call ourselves the Holy Rollers. Well, now you've got all these, you know the bowling scene, right? You've got all these drunk goofballs who, I dearly love them, but they're rough around the edges. A lot of them haven't stepped into a church, right? And so when they see that name, they're like, wait, what's that all about? Oh, well, we're church workers, and so, my friend thought it would be funny. Oh, no, we don't stand a chance now.
Right, because we're really good.
Because now we got the big man fighting against us. And I said, yeah, because God cares an awful lot about how many strikes I throw tonight.
You hear athletes saying that, they praise God for,
Right.
but they'll say,
Mahomes
God was
after
on
the
their
Super Bowl.
side.
Yeah.
You hear that quite a bit, actually. God doesn't not picking any sides.
Right. There's a difference between thanking God for the gifts and talents that you've been
Right.
given and giving Him credit for the victory. Saying, I thank God for this victory because He gave us the gifts and talents, versus I thank God for this victory because He really wanted us to win.
Right.
Right.
Right? I struggle with that notion that God cares at all whether or not the 49ers or the Chiefs won yesterday. Right? I struggle with that notion. I don't think it's really that important to Him. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe He's a big Chiefs fan. I don't know. They've won a lot. But over spiritualizing it is a very dangerous thing. Right? And we just don't fall into that trap. And that's the trap that Jephthah fell into.
There's a note in my study Bible. This leader, chosen by God, chose to bargain with God rather than to simply trust Him.
Yeah, right. So whether he felt like he needed to secure that victory further, felt like he needed to win favor with God, that was a very common notion in those pagan belief systems there. So maybe he did feel like he needed one final coin in the purse, one final chip on the table, right? But whatever it is, big mistake. So
you talk about Abram, we think about
mhm.
Abram and Isaac.
Yeah.
So the difference is, Abram was doing what God said
Right.
he was supposed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and Jephthah is it a difference because Jephthah was trying to make a deal?
So, in the case of Abram, God says, you will go sacrifice your son, your only son, on this hill. It's God's command. Here, Jephthah's like, Lord, if you give me this victory, I promise I'll sacrifice whatever comes out of my door.
Oh, okay.
It's totally different.
So
It's not ordained by God. God's not even in the equation here.
Making a bargain, basically.
Yeah. He feels like he needs a few more chips in his corner. God's promise isn't enough. He he needs to promise, and he's probably thinking like, oh, I'll just sacrifice one of my servants or our dog, or I don't know. I doubt he'd expect a sheep to come out the front door, but like,
Right.
you know, but yeah, just a really, really messy thing. So, let's keep reading. So the men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire. And Jephthah said to them, I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. When I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day, against me this day to fight? Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim, and the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, you are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when all the fugitives of Ephraim said, let me go over, the men of Gilead said to him, are you an Ephraimite? When he said no, they said to him, then say Shibboleth. And he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in the city of Gilead. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave in marriage outside his clan, and the 30 daughters he brought in from the outside of his son, for his sons, and he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel, and he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Chicago in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite judged Israel and had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon the son of Hillel the Pirathonite died and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. All right. Let me bring up that map. All right. I think I have it in good notes. Okay. So having defeated the Ammonite king and sacrificed his only daughter, Jephthah is now challenged by the men of Ephraim. Why did they threaten to do this, to do, and why? What did they threaten to do and why?
Burn down his house.
Burn down his house. Because
The men of Ephraim didn't ask him, or they didn't ask him to help fight the Ammonites.
right, again, a group angry that they didn't get glory in the fight. They didn't get to fight alongside him. How did Jephthah respond to that?
I called and you didn't help.
Yeah, I asked. What more do you want from me? I asked. You didn't help. You didn't come. Did Jephthah need the help of Ephraim?
Clearly not.
No. Yeah, clearly not. He already won the fight. God won the fight. So then Jephthah and the men of Gilead engaged the men of Ephraim in battle and defeat them. What land did the Gileadites occupy? I didn't think that was a very good question because they
Was it Jordan?
it was a bit misleading. Yeah, they're talking about the fords of Jordan, right? So over here is where Ephraim is, right? And Gilead's over here. It's in Gad.
Ephraim was the green space I thought of, but,
Yeah, is it?
I think it was the northern green space. Oh, it's Asher.
Yeah. Yeah, Ephraim's down here, that's where,
Okay.
so the Canaanites occupied this territory, and so they crossed the Jordan to occupy Gad. And is it Gibeon? What are we talking about? All these names.
Right?
So they cross over there, and the Ammonites join them in that junction. And largely the fight is with the Ammonites. Okay? But Ephraim's mad that they didn't get an invite to the fight. And they did get an invite to the fight. But so they cross over and they battle, and Gilead wins the fight. But then they camp out on the Jordan River, and what did they do?
What did the men of Gilead do?
Yeah.
They were slain.
They
Because
slayed
they
the
couldn't
Ephraimites, right?
Shabbat.
Yeah, Shibboleth, right? Shibboleth. And I'm not sure how to understand this, but I can't say I'm too surprised by it. There's in the Hebrew, there are two letters that look like a W. And you want to see the difference? This is the letter Sin, and this is the letter Shin. And so it would not surprise me at all if they became interchangeable with some words and in the different language. And so what we have here is the Hebrew word for flood, Shibboleth. But it would not surprise me if they pronounced it with a sin instead of a shin. And so they would have pronounced it Sibboleth. Now, I don't understand why that would necessarily be something they couldn't just fake. Right? I don't know that I grasp exactly what it is, but there's something going on with their accents and with the way that they pronounce this word.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
almost made it sound like,
It has to do with-
like if no, wow.
Say bag.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
bag
If you
back.
say it wrong, we know you're from New York and off with your head.
right.
In World War II,
Yeah.
they had some spies say Lollapalooza.
Gesundheit.
Yeah, they used to say, pronounce that word.
Sure.
And they knew who could pronounce it and who couldn't,
Interesting.
and they found out, okay, that's what I gather from it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a lot of what it is, and that's how they identify between the Ephraimites and their people. How many men of Ephraim died?
42,000.
42,000. And remember, these are their brothers and sisters. Like, these are fellow Israelites that are so very aggressive toward one another. How long does the outcast Jephthah, who had made that very foolish vow, he'd just like to keep reminding us of that. How long does he judge Israel?
6 years.
6 years. We've seen how God uses the weak to demonstrate military victories are his. What can we learn from the account of Jephthah?
But you only need God by your side.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't try to manipulate God. Right? Just trust him. He's by your side. He's going to bring the victory. Trust him. Right? Don't try to manipulate him. So then the author of the book quickly skips over 3 more judges. Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. Ibzan for 7 years, Elon for 10 years, and Abdon for 8 years. And we're already almost all the way through the 12 judges.
But, you know, I found interesting, I
Yeah.
watched the Super Bowl yesterday, a lot of people watched the commercials.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that one with Arnold Schwarzenegger was in that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
what word could he
Neighbors.
pronounce?
Neighbor.
Neighbor, yeah. But, you
Yeah.
know, but that's what, like I said, what they did in World War II, you know, most people couldn't pronounce a certain word, and because the Germans used a lot of spies, which everyone did.
Yeah.
It's like somebody pronouncing Edina, Edna.
What's that?
Like, you know, if somebody's not from Minnesota, if they say
You show them the word Edina, and they say Edna.
Edna or Edina.
Edna.
Edina, like
Edna.
Al Michaels, Edina.
Yeah,
Or Shakopee,
yes,
Shakopee.
yeah,
Um,
Wayzata, or Wisconsin.
you can do that in Wisconsin really, really easily.
Yeah,
Just say Waukesha.
Menominee.
Menominee.
Not
Do. Okay. Anything else you guys want to talk about? Any questions you had about everything that we went through?
There's some rough area, I was looking up
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
places, and I don't know how people could have lived there.
Well, and it's rougher now than it was before. I mean, a lot of those areas have been war torn for so long,
Right.
so long, that they've grown even worse than they were.
And archaeologists,
Yeah.
worn out of them, were digging up that area, and it's just like,
Mm.
it's just a mess, and then, of course, the wars
Right.
was obviously a big part.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the Mesopotamian water. What do you call it? The underneath the water, water table. Thank you. I mean, it was at one time the most lush place on earth, and now it's a desert. It's been absolutely destroyed by human beings, by the conflict for so long. I mean, but at one point, this area was a wonderful, beautiful place. I mean, this is likely not, I don't know that Israel necessarily, but that area is likely where the Garden of Eden was. And it was likely destroyed by the flood. So we're talking about a very lush and beautiful area. That's why people are fighting over it so much. But yeah, you can just, it's just kind of sad to see all the violence and the problem. All right, well, if you don't have any more questions, thank you for coming. Next week we talk about Samson.